good. You're keeping your wings nice and level. That's good. Now bring the throttle all the way back and pull the wheel back smoothly. Back, back. Fine. Hold it right there, even after you feel the plane touch down. Now steer the plane with your feet. Push the rudder pedal in the direction you want to.
An emergency incident such as this makes for a great media event. A person who is not a pilot takes over the controls of the plane following the collapse of the pilot and safely lands, with help from air traffic controllers and other pilots. You may recall the time when 3 ladies in their 60s and 70s brought their plane safely into Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, or when a businessman landed a chartered plane at Peoria, or when another lady was saved from flying out over the Atlantic while on a cross-country hop across Florida with her husband. Actually, these 3 events are extremely rare. General aviation has a good safety record which keeps improving each year. Your chances of completing a flight in a smaller aircraft are almost as good as if you were flying on an airliner. However, there is a difference between your role as a passenger on an airline and your role as a passenger in a general aviation airplane. The airline passenger is usually an indifferent spectator to the flight. He may know that the plane looks like that he is riding on, but once on board there is little to remind him that he is even on an airplane. He expects to arrive at his destination without having to give a thought as to what went into making his flight possible. The general aviation passenger has the advantage of being able to travel to thousands of airports not available to the airline passenger. However, the nature of the plane he rides on makes the smaller plane passenger more of a participant. From where he sits, he can see most of the plane. He can see the controls move and hear the pilot as he communicates with people on the ground. In a single pilot aircraft, who will do the flying if the pilot is incapacitated? If the person in the right seat is not a pilot, is he or she doomed? We think not. Our program is designed to help those of you who are frequent right seat passengers in smaller aircraft take command in an emergency and return the plane safely to the ground. All airplanes from ultralights to 747s are basically flown in the same way. If you move the controls in a certain direction, the plane will respond in a predictable manner. What does that mean for you who travel frequently in a general aviation aircraft? It means that by becoming knowledgeable about how airplanes fly and what it takes to make a successful flight, you can greatly improve your chances of saving yourself in the rare emergency of pilot incapacitation. We will not qualify you to be a certified pilot in this presentation, but we are sure that we can help you with your chances for survival if the day should ever come when you do have to fly the airplane. We have divided the presentation into 4 parts. Our first section will consist of a no-stress lesson on how to climb and descend, how to make turns, and how to maintain direction. Getting used to the equipment and controls is the theme of the second section. We will show you how to use the radios, instruments, and controls. On Section 3, we will guide you through an approach and landing. Section 4 will be an enactment of an emergency. We will summarize all of the material from the first 3 sections in a simulated emergency. It's time for the first lesson. Let's review how the controls work and the reaction of the plane in flight. You will need a reference for the maneuvers, so relate the top of the instrument panel and the wingtips to the horizon. As you move the controls, you will be able to follow the plane's reaction from those references. Now, keeping your eyes on the horizon, gently push the control wheel forward. Notice how the nose drops and the plane picks up speed. A gentle pull brings the nose back up and the speed slows down. We refer to this as pitch control. There will be times when your senses will not be able to record slight changes in the attitude of the plane. The best substitute for your natural senses in this regard is the artificial horizon. It responds immediately to all changes and pictorially shows you your attitude. It is generally centered in the front of the pilot on the top row. It kind of looks like a small video game. If you're flying in clear weather, you won't have much need for it other than as a confidence booster. It is repeating what you are seeing out the windshield so you can confirm your flying skill with it. On a hazy day or at night, you will find more use for it. Don't concentrate on any single instrument. Look quickly at them and then look back outside to see where you are going. There is a miniature airplane fixed in the middle of the instrument. The horizon is represented by a white bar or line between the dark and light half of the instrument face. Whatever you do with your plane is duplicated by that mini-plane on the instrument. To support the information from the artificial horizon, there are two more dials. They both act a bit more slowly than the artificial horizon, but they also add important numbers you need to know. The first is the altimeter. Let's watch it work. You will notice the large needle is moving counterclockwise. This means the plane is losing altitude. A turn will generally produce some loss of altitude unless corrective action is taken. You have learned which control is for pitch, so let's use it. A little back pressure on the wheel until that needle on the altimeter stops moving. Now just hold things in place for a few seconds. You will probably be asked by your ground contact if you can read your altimeter. So here are some tips. The most common altimeters have 3 needles of varying sizes. The largest needle reads in hundreds of feet, the middle-sized needle in thousands of feet, and the little needle in tens of thousands. Some altimeters substitute a delta shape at the edge of the dial for the smallest needle. This altimeter is reading 800 feet. The large needle is on the 8, but neither of the other needles have yet passed the number 1. This means that the plane that this altimeter is in is 800 feet above sea level, maybe on the ground, maybe in the air. By law, all altimeters must be set to read above sea level so that all pilots have a common base from which to operate. With the altimeter reading in feet above sea level, the pilot must do some arithmetic to figure out how high above the ground he actually is. You won't need to concern yourself with this. Your ground contact will keep you above obstacles. Read this 2-needle altimeter. If you read 6,000, you are correct. The small needle is on the 6 and the large needle is on 0. Good. Try one more. 9,500 is correct. The small needle is on the 9 for 9,000 and the largest needle is on the 5 for 500 more. Put them together and you have 9,500. There is a newer altimeter which eliminates all but the large needle. In place of the other needles, there is a digital readout. This altimeter is reading 13,250 feet. By the way, if you are flying a well-equipped plane which has a radar altimeter, ignore it. These are primarily used for instrument approaches which you won't be doing. The other numbered instrument is the airspeed indicator. In most planes, the airspeed indicator is located in the top row of the instruments just to the left of center of the pilot's side. It may read in either miles per hour or knots, but that should not be a problem. Instructions from your ground contact will take into consideration the units on the dial. You will only need to report the numbers. There are several color codings around the edge of the dial. Your only concern should be in keeping the speed within the limits of the green arc. The top of that arc is your stall speed. You don't want to see the needle there until your wheels have rolled onto the ground. Next, gently roll the plane from side to side by rolling the wheel gently to the left and right. This controls bank. You will use it to keep your wings level and to make turns. Now try the rudder pedals. Place your heels on the floor and put the balls of your feet on the pedals. A gentle push in each direction will demonstrate yaw. You will notice that the nose of the plane drifts from left to right, but it does little actual turning. As mentioned previously, the rudder does not make the plane turn. The wings in a bank do that, so we won't emphasize the rudder pedals much in this lesson. The ailerons controlling roll, the elevators controlling pitch, and the rudders controlling yaw are what it takes to control an airplane. Let's say that you would like to fly a little higher for better visibility or to improve radio communications. You can make the plane go up without adding power simply by gently pulling back on the wheel a short distance and holding it there. Scan the first 3 instruments you have just studied. The little plane on the artificial horizon is now slightly above the horizon line with wings level, just like the plane you are flying. The large needle on the altimeter is moving clockwise, which means you are going up. The airspeed indicator shows a slowing from 120 knots to 110 knots. You are trading some airspeed for altitude. This will work in a shallow climb without additional power as long as the airspeed stays well within the green band. For descent, you should push gently forward on the wheel to make the nose go down. Note that the position of the little plane in the artificial horizon, direction of the needle of the altimeter, and the increasing airspeed. Make the descent gradual enough that the airspeed doesn't go into the yellow caution band. You will notice that the plane doesn't want to stay in a climb or a descent unless you literally hold it there. The continued pressure on the wheel gets tiresome after a while, but you can go to the trim control for some relief. Somewhere down there between the seats is usually a small wheel with a trim indicator nearby. The purpose of this control is to relieve the pilot of holding pressure on the main control wheel under certain flight conditions. Now roll the trim wheel forward a little. You can feel the plane want to pitch down. Rolling it back causes the plane to pitch up. It is possible at cruise speeds to adjust the trim so that the plane will fly hands off for a short period of time. Okay, we've got pitch figured out. Let's try our first turn. For this exercise, keep both feet flat on the floor. Our first turn will be to the left, so turn the wheel gently to the left. We want a shallow bank of between 5 and 10 degrees. As soon as the plane wing starts down, the plane begins turning left. Now it might seem like this is like driving a car. Not quite. In your car, you keep the wheels turned until you have completed your turn. In your plane, you must stop the roll at the desired angle of bank. Once you have the degree of bank you want, you must return the control wheel to neutral position and hold it there to complete the turn. Notice where your wingtips are and the relationship between the top of the panel and the horizon. Try to keep that degree of bank by using slight adjustments of the wheel right or left. Back pressure of a slight amount will help you maintain altitude. Stopping the turn is simply the reverse of getting into one. Since you are turning left, you will roll the wheel to the right to level the wings. As the wings return to level, there is no more need for back pressure. Relax that and you are flying level again. Try a shallow turn to the right now. This time we will start flying parallel to that road down there. Start the turn just before you get to the intersection and make a 90-degree turn to fly along the other road. That is all there is to making a turn. Roll the wheel gently in the direction you want to go, stop the roll at the angle of bank that you want, and hold a little back pressure to keep from losing altitude. Stop the turn by reversing the procedure. Right in front of the pilot in the second row is a directional gyro. You keep your heading with this. It is numbered in 360 degrees of a full circle. 90 represents east, 180 is south, and 270 is west, and 360 is north. If you are asked to follow a certain heading, it will probably be in numbers rather than in common directions. With most inexperienced pilots, there is a tendency to concentrate on an instrument. If you are told to turn to a new heading, watch where you are flying and occasionally steal a glance at the directional gyro to see how close you are to the new heading. If you overshoot a heading, you can always turn back. We will assume a heading of 300 degrees, but your ground contact has requested that you turn left to 270 degrees. Starting from our heading of 300 degrees, make a shallow bank to the left. The numbers start to roll by. 290, 280, 275. Now level the wings gently and you should be close to your new heading of 270 degrees. Anytime a wing gets down, you start to turn in that direction. You can keep your new heading of 270 degrees by keeping the wings level with your outside reference or the artificial horizon. Let's review what we have learned about controlling the plane in level flight, climb, descend, and turns. Number 1, rolling the control wheel turns you in the direction you are moving the wheel. Number 2, pitch is controlled by the forward-backward movement of the control wheel. Number 3, pushing a rudder pedal causes the plane to yaw in the direction of the pedal pushed, but it doesn't turn the plane. Number 4, the trim control helps relieve back pressure on the wheel. Number 5, the artificial horizon, altimeter, and airspeed indicator were located and used for reference. Number 6, The directional gyro was located and used for reference in directional control. Keeping the airplane flying and getting it back on the ground is what this lesson is all about. Let's examine which of the things on the panel in front of you will help. Just looking at an instrument panel may confuse some people. However, there are only a few of those dials important to you in an emergency. The rest are there to aid your regular pilot in flying more safely and efficiently. We haven't covered how you are going to control power, so let's take a look at that now. The throttle is located in the center of the panel near the bottom. It may either be a plunger like this or a lever similar to this one. They both work in the same manner. If you want more power, you push the throttle forward. If you wish to reduce power, pull back on the throttle. You push power into the plane and pull it out. During the course of your recovery from an emergency, persons on the ground helping you may refer to power settings for letting down or resuming level flight. If your plane has a fixed pitch prop, you have one instrument to monitor. It is the tachometer. Its placement varies from plane to plane, but they all look much like this one. The tachometer winds up towards the higher numbers. Pull out the throttle and the needle moves down the numbers. If you are told to increase power to 2400 RPM, you need to know that each number is a multiple of 100. Most cross-country planes have controllable propellers. This requires another control and another instrument. Look just to the right of the throttle. You will find another control, usually with a scalloped edge knob. This is the prop control, and you manage the RPM with it. This instrument is a manifold pressure gauge and is associated with the throttle. It is read in inches of mercury, as with a barometer. Large numbers mean more power. Locate it and observe how it behaves on your next flight. One of the first questions you are going to be asked over your radio is, how much fuel have you on board? You have tanks in both wings, so you need to look for at least two gauges. They may be small, square instruments similar to the ones on your car, or they may be semicircular like these. Most of them will read in gallons, but some read in pounds. Your ground contacts will figure out if you just give them the indications. It may be necessary for you to switch fuel tanks on instructions from the ground. The selector valve is usually located on the floor between the front seats. You should learn where it is located so that you don't have to take your eyes from your flying very long to look for it. Shown here is an example of a fuel selector. Don't move it unless you have been instructed to do so by your ground contact. When the time comes, look directly down at the valve to make sure you have placed it in the correct position according to your instructions. As long as we're dealing with power controls, let's take a look at a couple of others. To the right of the prop control is another lever, often painted red. This is the mixture control. It is differentiated in some manner so that it isn't mistaken for any other. You may not be instructed to move it, but you need to be able to recognize it to keep it separate from other controls. The mixture control is used to kill the engine before the switches are turned off. That's why it's red and why you shouldn't mess with it until instructed to do so. Some aircraft have carburetor heat control. This is another plunger, generally to the left of the throttle. Its purpose is to keep the carburetor free of ice, which can form under certain atmospheric conditions. Another control you may not use, but need to know just in case you are requested to turn it off or on. You may be requested to turn on landing lights for identification purpose. All manufacturers have their own special places and shapes for these switches, so you should acquaint yourself with the location of the landing light switch. If you don't know where it is, tell your ground contact, but don't take your eyes off of your flying to search for it. The rest of the instruments and switches should be of no concern to you. They all have their functions or they wouldn't be there. You can learn about these when you make the big step toward obtaining your license. Before we get into radios, there are a couple other items to check out. You would probably like to have wheels under you when you get to the runway. If you are in a fixed gear plane, you have it made. If you are in a retractable, you are going to need to know how to put the gear down. Look for a lever shaped like this. It is most often found left of the power controls, not on all aircraft. Know where it is located, what it looks like, and how it feels in your hand. When you are told to lower the gear, be ready for the plane to behave slightly different. It may shudder a bit and slow somewhat and even give a pitch change. You can control all of this. After you have pushed the gear lever down, look for the green lights on the panel which confirm the gear down and locked. Those lights are a good omen when you are on final approach. There is another lever on some planes which can be confused with the gear lever. It regulates the flaps which you may be called on to use. The handle is shaped like the curve of a wing and is most often to the right of the engine and prop controls. If there is no flap lever there, the flaps are probably controlled by a long lever between the front seats. You may luck out and have an autopilot on board. If you do, it will probably be operating when you find it necessary to take over. Autopilots are made by several companies. This is an example. You can make the plane turn, climb, and descend by small manipulations of the autopilot controls. This is something you can be instructed on if the time ever comes. Primarily, we are interested in how to turn it on and off. You may be able to fly to the vicinity of your airport on autopilot and turn it off to make the landing by hand. These are the switches you would use to shut down the autopilot. Remember that as soon as you throw that switch, you are flying the plane. One of the areas of flying in which you can get some practice regularly is communications. On some of your flights, ask the pilot if you can make some of the routine call-ups such as position reports or your intentions at uncontrolled airports. You may be of help to the pilot by tuning frequencies for him. The frequencies on a VHF aviation radio are similar to those on your FM radio. In fact, the aviation band begins just beyond the top numbers of your FM dial. The units are in megahertz. Your aircraft radios operate on a very high frequency or VHF signals. Since aircraft radio are at higher altitudes than your home or car FM radios, their reception is better. However, there is a limit even for an antenna 5,000 feet in the air. It may be possible that you would run out of range for a particular transmitter. In most of the United States, there will be another station close enough to pick up your signal and return your call. In a high-stress situation, the best radio procedure is to pick up the microphone, press the button, and call for help. If by chance you can't raise anyone on your operating frequency, what follows will eventually get you an answer. There are a couple of techniques in using a microphone which make them most effective. Hold the mic directly in front of and close to your lips. Try to talk in a normal tone of voice. You squeeze the mic button to talk, release it to listen. Let's see here. A headset and boom mic may be the equipment used in your plane. In this case, the push-to-talk button is either strapped to the wheel with Velcro or is a switch on the wheel. You use it as you do a hand mic. Push the button to talk, let it up to listen. In many planes, the pilot will leave the hand mic in its holder even though he is using a boom mic. If the hand mic is in place, use it. If the only microphone is on the pilot's headset, retrieve it and put it on. Make sure the cord is not entangled with the control wheel. Mic operations will be difficult because the mic switch will probably be on the left side of the pilot's wheel. If it is Velcroed on, you can loosen it and bring it as close as possible. Otherwise, you will have to reach over with your left hand to push the switch each time you want to talk. As with scanning the instruments, it is important to keep your attention on flying. Don't let the retrieval of the headset occupy your full attention. On most planes, the radios are located in the center of the panel, convenient to both front seats. The communication sets are most likely to be at the top of the stack of radio equipment. Right at the top of the stack is a row of switches or buttons with some little lights. This is called the audio panel. You can select which set you want to use by moving these switches. In order to eliminate confusion, we suggest that you leave the audio panel as it is set and place the same frequency on both of your radios. Be alert now, because the thing that I say next may be the most important statement of the whole lesson. The worldwide emergency frequency is 121.5 megahertz. That is 121.5. If you have need to use it, someone will hear you. It may be a military facility, an FAA facility, or even another aircraft. In fact, there will probably be several ears listening. Help is at the other end of your mic cord. No one is going to stand on formal procedures during an emergency. Tune both of your radios to 121.5 and call for help. Mayday is the international distress call if you wish to use it. The registration number for the plane is on the panel in front of the pilot. If you can give the type of plane and that registration number, it will help in identifying you. From there on, do your talking in plain English. You may have one of two types of tuners on your radios. The first type has a lighted electronic numbers which are punched in by a button similar to this one. On many of these radios, you may also tune in a standby frequency while still using the primary one. When you hit the button, the two frequencies are reversed, which is nice to have when you are busy. Less expensive or older radios use mechanical click tuning. Two concentric knobs do the tuning. The outer knob changes the whole numbers, while the inner knob changes the decimals. Navigational radios are tuned in the same way. You will probably have another electronic device which can send an emergency message simply by tuning it. It is your transponder. The location is usually low on the radio stack or on the right panel. It can be identified by 4 small windows with a single digit in each. It also has a light which flashes and a button labeled ident. The number in the window is selected by a small dial just below it. The transponder is your answering service. When a radar beam hits your antenna, it asks your transponder a couple of quick questions. The transponder answers immediately, and the information flashes on a radar screen on the ground. The emergency number for a transponder is 7700. Dial it in. In the radar room, a horn will sound and your blip on the screen will flash. You now have the attention of a controller, and he knows where you are. Your radio is your link to salvation. The sooner you hear voices, the sooner you will have a successful landing. Remember these things. Number 1, locate the communication radios in your plane. Number 2, practice tuning them. Number 3, place both sets on the emergency frequency of 121.5 if you can't get a response on the frequencies which were dialed in. Number 4, tune your transponder to 7700. Number 5, push the mic button to talk and let up to listen. The situation may occur where you can't be located because you either have no transponder or aren't in radar contact. Then you will have to help your friends on the ground locate you. The most immediate thing you can do is observe any prominent landmarks in the area. A lake, tall mountain, railroad, expressway, a small town are some examples. By describing them and giving your heading from the directional gyro, your contact may be able to locate you from charts or from personal knowledge of the area. Most pilots maintain some form of flight log. These are usually highly individualized, but most follow an accepted format. If your pilot has one on his lap, it may help in locating you if you describe the entries to your ground contact. The next step is a demonstration landing. Landing the plane is a little higher degree of difficulty, so we won't expect as much of you as on level flight and turns. The old adage in aviation is that a good landing is any landing you can walk away from. In an emergency, you will probably be directed straight into the runway without the formality of a traffic pattern. Reduce your power by 5 or 6 inches. Maintain level flight as your airspeed reduces to about 100. Lowering the gear begins your descent. Maintain your usual airspeed. Look out the front of the plane now and you will see the runway. We are now closer to the ground and you will have a greater sense of speed. Just think of the runway as your highway and concentrate on it. Airspeed control is important here. If your normal approach speed is 80, try to keep that airspeed until you are almost on the runway. You will need to use a combination of pitch control and throttle. For smaller adjustments, a little back pressure will slow you down and forward pressure will speed you up. Save the throttle for larger adjustments. We are now descending on our final approach with a constant speed. Perhaps you have noticed that you are holding quite a bit of back pressure on the wheel. There is a way to reduce that pressure. The trim wheel down below the seats can be slowly rolled back until you have equalized the pressure. At this point, I would like to have you take your feet off the floor and move them to the rudder pedals. Heels on the floor, toes on the pedals is correct. There is usually some turbulence near the ground, so some subtle rudder pressure may be needed to keep the nose lined up with the runway. Use right rudder to move the nose right and left rudder to move the nose left. Many new students have a bad habit of watching the ground come up at them. The best place for your eyes is to concentrate down the runway, perhaps 1,000 feet ahead. It is easier to keep the plane straight with this technique while your peripheral vision accounts for height and speed. Another technique used by some pilots is to keep the big numbers on the runway end in the reference position to the nose of your plane. If the numbers seem to be creeping ahead of the plane, you need more power to avoid landing short. If the numbers creep back under the nose, you are too high and need less power, but don't let the airspeed increase. As you pass over the end of the runway, keep the wings level and begin to pull back forcefully but smoothly on the control wheel. At the same time, pull the throttle all the way back. You are now just above the runway with the nose a little high. If you have pulled back a little too much, the plane may balloon up a few feet. If it does, just relax a bit on the back pressure. Just hold the plane in that position and it should settle to the runway with a squeak of the tires. You're on the runway finally, and the rudder pedals become the most important control. Since the control wheel is useless for directional control, hold it back as in the landing. If the plane wanders left, push gently on the right rudder pedal. Push the pedal in the direction you want the plane to go. In most aircraft with a nose gear, the rudder pedals are also hooked to the nose wheel for ground steering. Steering a plane is not like steering a car. On the ground, the wheel is useless. Use the rudder pedals and push the pedal in the direction you wish to go. There are brakes on a plane which are activated by pressing down on the top of each rudder pedal. Pressing the brake on the right only engages the brake on the right wheel, with the same being true of the left. In order to stop straight ahead, both brake pedals must be pressed at the same time with equal pressure. Hard braking with only one wheel will cause the plane to skid and spin on the runway. We believe in most instances you can let the plane decelerate normally on the runway without using the brakes. You can lose control if you get carried away by kicking rudder pedals. Keep the heels on the floor and use your toes like a ballet dancer. Otherwise, your plane may resemble a skier doing a slalom among the runway lights. We are now back on the ground in good shape, so let's review a few things. Number 1, a final approach is similar to a normal descent. Number 2, airspeed control is critical on the approach. Back pressure slows the plane while forward pressure increases it. Number 3, the throttle is used for larger adjustments in airspeed and altitude. Number 4, a plane on the ground is steered by the rudder pedals. Number 5, brakes are located at the top of the rudder pedals and only work the wheel on the same side as that rudder pedal. You have received so much information by this time, you may be overwhelmed. We hope not, because we are about to demonstrate how it may be used in an emergency. There are 3 steps to survival which, if followed, will help you get the plane back on the ground. They are: Step 1, get the plane flying straight and level. Step 2, get help through the radio. Step 3, follow instructions from your ground contacts. Our summary will be in the form of an enactment of a pilot incapacitation emergency. The material we have been studying will be incorporated to bring the plane safely back to Earth.
My husband and I were headed for Cedar Rapids, Iowa in our plane. We had left Fort Wayne, Indiana just after 8 a.m. The weather was quite clear with a few clouds over Lake Michigan. and some other higher clouds scattered about. Because of the good weather, Jim decided not to file a flight plan, but he did keep a flight log. I watched the big lake appear off our right side. Then it all dropped behind the wingtip, and the farmland of Illinois took over. I glanced out to the horizon and found it all the same. So I pulled my book from my purse and began to read. I didn't appreciate how beautiful the land was until the next time I set foot on it. Several minutes later, I was concentrating on the story, but had a feeling something about our flight had changed. I glanced out the window, and Illinois was still there, but it was slowly turning. I knew we weren't near Cedar Rapids yet, and the flight was supposed to be fairly straight. I turned to ask what we were doing, but never had the chance. Jim was slumped in his seat with his head on his chest and his arms draped limply on his lap. He was unconscious, and the plane was without a pilot. I fought panic for several seconds, then I grabbed Jim and shook him in a futile attempt to awaken him. It probably didn't take long, but it seemed forever. I realized that I had to fly the plane if I was going to get him to medical help. I had studied a videotape covering this type of emergency. If I could recall what was in that lesson, I might have a chance. The first step was to get the plane flying straight and level. In my case, that wasn't very difficult. Our plane was still in a shallow left turn, so I put both hands on the wheel and rolled it to the right. It worked. The plane leveled. Well, not exactly. It actually went past level into a right turn. I managed a correction without much trouble. The wings were level now. I could tell by checking the wingtips and the horizon. I had a feeling that I was losing altitude. I started to pull back on the wheel, but thought maybe I should check something first. That would be the altimeter. There it was, just as on the videotape. The needle seemed to be pretty steady. That would mean that I was flying level. The altitude loss was an illusion. I would have to fight that. For a brief moment, I was exultant with the thought I had regained control of our plane. I turned to my husband to ask him what came next and was abruptly brought back to reality. I was on my own. The video lesson. What did it say next? Use the radios to get help. The radio stood in a column in the middle of the panel with their red numbers glowing at me. I have never been good at remembering numbers, so I had put the emergency frequency on the label and pasted it to the inside of the glove compartment door. There it was, 121.5. I remembered that I should put it on both radios. I got that done and checked the label for the transponder number for emergency. I set that number up on the transponder, 7700. With good weather and no flight plan, my husband had left the headset in his flight case. He had been using the hand mic, which I picked up and pushed the button. I don't remember now what I said, but it got results. At first there was a pause. Then a calm voice came through the ceiling speaker as though I was receiving a message from heaven. Aircraft declaring an emergency. What is your emergency? His voice was reassuring, and I think I began to talk a little more rationally. I gave him all of the facts and pleaded for help. He told me he was at the Chicago Air Traffic Control Center. He had our plane in radar contact and asked me if I was holding the plane straight and level. He suggested we call each other by first names in order to simplify things. Then he had me change the transponder code. Steve, the controller, was my hope for survival. He asked if I could tune another frequency. I told him that I could, since I often help my husband with communications. He asked me about my altitude. When I reported 4,200 feet, he congratulated me. Steve informed me that I was 5 miles southeast of Mendota, Illinois, and asked if I could see the town ahead and to the right. It was there. I could see an expressway below me, which I reported to him. He kept me busy enough that I had little time to think about my predicament. What was my heading? What was my altitude? What landmarks were below me? Turn to a heading of 360. What do the fuel gauges read? Switch the fuel selector valve now. Then he said it was time to say goodbye to me and turned me over to the tower at the Rockford Airport. They had a long, wide runway there and good medical facilities for my husband. There was an experienced pilot in the tower named Bob who would help me land the plane. I quickly heard a new voice asking me how things were going. It was Bob. He told me that I was about 10 minutes south of Rockford Airport. He had me turn the plane a little and started me on a shallow descent. That meant I had to move the throttle back and reduce power by 5 or 6 inches according to the manifold pressure gauge. I also had to slow the plane, which forced me to hold back pressure on the wheel. Bob asked if I knew where the trim wheel was and told me to roll it back a little. That was a great help. When I had the airspeed where he wanted it, He asked if I could see the airport ahead of me. I sure could. There was a long runway, and I was pointed right at it. Now it was time to get the gear down. Bob had me rehearse the steps a couple of times before he let me actually put the gear down. It was a little frightening at first. Finally, he told me not to acknowledge any more of his transmissions, but to concentrate on the landing. He would calmly tell me to turn right or left, get the nose up or down, add more power, or pull back on the throttle. I followed his instructions the best I could. Over the approach lights, he told me to put my heels on the floor and toes on the rudder pedals. He warned me to be gentle on the rudder until I was on the ground. Then I was supposed to hold the wheel back and steer with my feet. The plane waddled quite a bit coming in for a landing and then seemed to drop hard. I remember trying to steer with my feet, and that seemed to be the most difficult part of the whole experience. I was all over the runway and ended up in the grass beside the strip. It was an experience I never care to repeat, but I know I could do it again if called upon. A little preparation was invaluable for me, and it saved our lives.
Our scenario follows those of some recent episodes reported in the news. No two are exactly alike, but there are similarities in all of them. In concluding our presentation, I would like to comment on some items which may affect some of you who view this tape. Many Beechcraft planes have a swing-over control column. If the pilot is incapacitated, you will have to bring the wheel over to your side. We suggest you practice this a few times on the ground to become familiar with the procedure. Wear seat belts and shoulder harnesses at all times. Their value in landing and takeoff accidents is well documented. They also give you protection during a flight through turbulence. In addition, shoulder harnesses will help prevent the pilot from slumping onto the controls. A pilot slumped on the controls would make taking over control very difficult. Take 2 or 3 hours in a primary flight simulator. It isn't as expensive as regular flight instruction and a lot more fun than most video games. You will feel more comfortable with your plane if the time ever comes when you must take over. You may also be the lucky one who has a friendly pilot come alongside your plane and fly in formation with you. This rescue procedure has been very successful when it was possible to get a plane in the air in time. Seeing your help close at hand is very reassuring. That is our lesson. We have attempted to acquaint you with the inside of your plane. We have given you a beginning lesson in flight. We have also exposed you to what it may be like to experience a pilot incapacitation emergency. We hope you keep this tape near your VCR and review it at regular intervals. You will most likely never have to use it, but if you do, you will be better informed than most of the people you have read about in the paper. Here are some questions you should know the answers to. Number 1, when I lower the flaps, what happens to the plane? Number 2, what buttons or switches should I never touch? Number 3, what is the minimum airspeed of my plane? Number 4, what is the approach speed? Number 5, how do I turn off the autopilot? Number 6, how does the audio panel work? Number 7, where is the landing gear switch? Number 8, where is the landing light switch? Number 9, where is the trim wheel? Number 10, how do I change fuel tanks? Number 11, which radio is the transponder? Number 12, what do the colored arcs on the airspeed indicator mean? Number 13, how do I change the frequencies on the radio? Number 14, when are you going to let me fly? Thank you. My name is Julie Greek, and this is a presentation of Airmanship Incorporated.